and very stable. And they had very nice conditions in the sense that there wasn't that much ice, and the productivity in the fjords were very high, so that meant that they had lots of fish and seal that they could go hunting.
But just as in the Bronze Age, this unexpectedly warm period didn't last. The dramatic climate deterioration that followed was bad news for the Vikings. By the 15th century, their prized colony had died out. All that's left are some melancholy ruins. So what does this Viking story show? Well, by the 15th century, we know Greenland at least was cooling down. But I wonder if this cooling was more widespread, another of these natural rhythms in the climate. I remember at school learning that hundreds of years ago, the River Thames used to freeze over. Was this linked to the cooling in Greenland? Proof that just as the global climate can naturally warm up, so it can cool down. I'm off to the Museum of London to find out more.
Print room in here, we have about 20,000 prints or so, and amongst them we have quite a few of the frost fairs. Well, got a number of prints that were produced at the different frost fairs that they had in London when the Thames froze over. And this one here is from 1814, the last great sort of frost fair of London. You can see that it's wonderful for its detail.
Well, you know, you said frost fair. I've never heard the term frost fair before, but I did hear as a kid in history that the Thames froze up sometimes. And I just assumed it was a skim, just a skim of ice, you know, occasionally you may stand on it or something. But this is all the frozen Thames right here,
yeah,
with a tent city on it. This is just unbelievable. And this wasn't a one-off. As Mark points out, for hundreds of years, Londoners got used to the river freezing in winter.
On these prints here, we've got one from 1684.
Right.
Here. There's one from 1715.
Yes.
One from 1739 to 40.
Okay.
And then several of the 1814 frost fair.
So spanning, you know, what, a few hundred years?
Absolutely.
So of course I'm getting this, you know, strong feeling that it's not just an odd occurrence, it becomes part of life in London.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is part of everyone's life.
I think it's kind of...
This extended cold snap started in the 14th century, just as Greenland was cooling down.
This is a painting by Abraham Hondius, yeah.
To get an idea of just how cold it used to get, and it's really not that long ago, Mark's giving me a rare glimpse of this priceless oil painting hidden away in the museum's vaults. Well, Mark, what's this all about?
Oh, this is a very dramatic picture. This is the frozen Thames in 1677. And you see, we're looking eastward. This is Old London Bridge. You can see Southwark Cathedral there.
Yes.
So you know where we're
So these are people being guided across.
Yeah. Obviously, it must have been very, 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 very thick.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can see the skaters there and the tumble going on here. And so it's little details. It's recording a historic event, and it's very dramatic.
Yeah. But it's not even just the detail at the moment, Mark. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed at the moment that I know that scene. I know what the ice looks like when it's like this, from Canada, polar regions in the north, the Antarctic, and I can feel what it's like to be there, and I can evaluate those conditions. And I mean, even if you accept that for artistic reasons things may have been exaggerated or something, I mean, Hondius would have still been looking at this open water.
Yeah.
He would have been looking at these formations which show hard, brittle, cold ice.
Yeah.
I mean, these plates have broken because of the rising and falling of the tide.
Yeah.
And yet they're broken off in big, sharp, brittle. They haven't just degenerated into slush. So, you know, the sense of coldness and power here is amazing.
Yeah.
But I hadn't expected to see it in a scene in London. Wouldn't expect to see it. It's fantastic. The last frost fair was in 1814, and yet it seems like ancient history to us today. But throughout Europe, the period from the 14th to the 19th centuries was so cold that it was known as the Little Ice Age. That's London Bridge. and just this side of it would have been the original London Bridge. So essentially this is the same scene that we saw on those beautiful prints. But it's hard to imagine, isn't it? This would have been completely frozen over, and not just a skim of ice, but completely hard frozen over less than 200 years ago. I suppose people then must have thought it would always be this cold. And yet today, you rarely get any ice at all in London. I think we underestimate the power of the climate to rebound quite naturally from a period of unusual warmth, just as the medieval warm period was followed by the Little Ice Age. So our climate is constantly changing. It's been warming up and cooling down for thousands of years. So the question is the warming we're experiencing now just another one of these natural cycles? Or is it something new and different that we've triggered? To find out, I need to know what makes the climate change. What are the driving forces that make the climate warmer or colder? In my travels, I've seen at first hand how the weather can change, the effect of weather fronts, sudden storms and the like. But I find it much harder to see what could make the global temperature rise and fall over hundreds of years. I'm off to the Royal Geographical Society to do a spot of research. I used to be the Vice President, so this is a bit like coming home to me. I really want to find an explanation for all these natural shifts in climate. Whatever it is could also be what's causing the climate to warm up now. It seems to make sense to start with the Little Ice Age. It's relatively recent, so it should be well documented. I'm hoping there'll be some interesting theories explaining what caused it. First, it transpires the Little Ice Age wasn't actually cold all the time. Some years weren't too bad, but there were others that were brutally cold. I'm finding a lot of information about a so-called year without a summer. Apparently it was a really cold year, 1816, and it was during the Little Ice Age. It seems to be linked with a huge volcanic eruption the year before in Indonesia. It was called Tambora. There are diary entries which captured just how bad 1816 was. On the 7th of June, one man wrote, "The surface of the ground was stiff with frost. A wash tub full of rainwater was scummed with ice." Now I can understand how a big volcanic eruption might cool the local area down, all that dust in the atmosphere. But this diary was written on the other side of the world, on the east coast of America. Could eruptions like Tambora really affect global climate? There's something else I keep coming across that also seems to have an influence on climate. Apparently changes in the sun, so-called solar cycles, can also have a big global impact. You know, I keep coming across these two things that seem to affect the climate. One is volcanoes, and the other one is a variation in the sun's output, these solar cycles. But I still don't understand how they can affect our climate over hundreds of years. So I've arranged to meet an expert, someone who can tell me if these two factors really can explain climate changes like the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age.
Well, if you think about it, the sun is providing all the energy we need for the climate system. Without the sun, we'd be pretty cold. Right. So if the solar radiation is varying, then that's going to affect the climate.
So the solar radiation varies every day or every week? What kind of timescale?
Well, it's varying on all sorts of timescales, from minutes to thousands of years. But of course, for climate concerns, we're interested in the 11-year solar cycle and on cycles of about 200 years.
But what about these volcanoes? I mean, I just read about Tambora in there. Went off in 1816 during the period of the Little Ice Age. How could that have actually helped make it even colder?
Well, what happens is when you get a major volcanic eruption, it throws a whole load of material out into the atmosphere, and if it manages to reach the stratosphere, which is a very stable layer of the atmosphere at about 15 kilometres, it can stay there for months or even years. And while it's there, it's reflecting the sun's radiation back to space, and so making the climate cooler. So it does seem possible that changes in the sun's output and huge volcanic eruptions